This is Open Door with Vince Robinson. In-depth conversations with people who are making a difference in the lives of others here and around the world. Culture is at the heart of who you are. Know your culture, find yourself on Open Door with Vince Robinson.
Grand dawning, great rising, Cleveland, Ohio, and the rest of planet Earth. Welcome to another edition of Open Door with Vince Robinson. This is the third time that we are initiating this recording, and third time is a charm. We got it all right. I am very privileged today to have with me as a guest an international poet. His name is Ketu, and he's going to tell us his full name and what that all means. But I will tell you up front, after having done this twice already, he grew up in Westchester County, New York, which is about 20 miles north of New York City. He is an octogenarian. That means he's been on the planet for 8 decades, 80 years. At the age of 70, he embarked on a 382-day tour of the United States of America, 48 contiguous states. And he is a poet. So that is the short version of who he is. We're going to start with the name. Brother Ketu, welcome to Open Door with Vince Robinson.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to get this right.
All right. Well, I appreciate that opportunity. You know, that's the wonder of technology. You know, at a point, you'd have to go to a radio station and sit in front of a microphone to be heard. Now, with the magic of technology, cell phones, laptops, we got microphones, we got cameras, and we have a worldwide audience at the push of a button. So it's so much easier now. We made it a little complicated, but we've gotten past that. So K2 and the other names that go along with it. Let's start with that. Your identity is steeped in African tradition. Talk to us about that.
Yes. Identity is definitely the sweet spot. The name is Olafin Omowale Ketu Oladuwa. It is of Yoruba heritage, and it didn't come by blood, it came by spirit. And it came by spirit while I was on death row in Massachusetts when I was 22 years old. 22 was when it came, and that's significant in another way. At 21, I was accused of a murder that I did not commit. At 21, I was fresh out of the U.S. Air Force. I had gotten out on Lincoln's birthday in 1965. That was the February 12th. On the 21st, Malcolm was assassinated. On that 22nd year of my life, I came into an understanding that my life had meaning, that my life had depth, and that I simply needed to do the work to understand that meaning and that depth. At 21, I was dumb as a rock. My ancestors loved me enough to give me a time out. The whole thing that transpired that put me on death row, and this is an after the fact understanding, was meant for me to take a look at who I was at that point in my life, which I really didn't know. I knew that there was one person in my life that loved me unconditionally, and that was my mother. And my mother was a foster mother, um, who took me in at 67 years old and stayed with me until she was 100. I was groomed and grown with the wisdom and the knowledge that was born in 1878. That priming prepared me for what I faced when I was 21 years old. Of course, at 21, I didn't know that. I thought my thoughts were wild. My thoughts, my thinking is what landed me on death row. Not what I did, but what I was thinking. I thought that in America, as I had been told, you're innocent until you're proven guilty. I thought that right overcomes wrong when the truth is the road that you walk. These things had been groomed into me by the school system, by the church, by the society. And so when I was in the police station for 36 hours, being fed coffee and sugar and all the things that make you insane, I told the police that all I wanted to do was go to sleep. I would tell them whatever they wanted to know, just let me go to sleep. Because in the back of my mind, I knew I didn't do anything. In the back of my mind, I was going to go home. The reality didn't hit me of where I was until the judge in the case said, "And may God have mercy on your soul." And I was shocked awake at that point, but I still wasn't aware. I still thought I was going home. Sitting in the back of the Massachusetts State Police car that took me to Walpole, I still thought I was going home. When they turned me over to the prison authorities and they walked me through that tunnel, and I heard that iron gate slam behind me, that's where consciousness entered. That's when I knew I wasn't going home. And what the judge had told me impressed me. Still, for 2 months, everybody who I talked to on the row, who came into the row, everybody I talked to, I told them I didn't have any business there. I was innocent and I didn't have any business there. And then one of my cellies, Pete Ledetto, Mafia hitman, he said, "Don't you know that everybody in here is innocent?" And reality dawned. From that point on, I began a communication with quote unquote God, with my ancestors, with the community that had raised me, I began a communication that elevated me into the ranks of being human. It's there that I began to understand what it means to be human. Sitting out in front of my cell, this is October, November, December 1966. Pre-Thanksgiving 1966, my mother came to visit me. The first question she asked me was, "Did you kill that girl?" And I told her no. She told me, "You'll be here for 5 years, 2 months, and some days." And that's exactly what happened. From that visit on, I never touched, asked for, or saw a law book. I never made an attempt to extricate myself from that place. What I had intended, what I consciously intended, was that if the state of Massachusetts was going to take my life, then by the time that happened, I was going to know who I was and why I was and why I was in the position that I was in. In front of my cell, there was a television. This is 1966. Harlem had gone up in 64. Watts was 65. And America was on fire. And black people in America, Negroes in America, were redefining themselves, ourselves. We made the shift from being Negro to being black. On the television in front of my cell, I was seeing Amiri Baraka, Sonia Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni, Mari Evans, references to Etheridge Knight. I was seeing the prophets of that day. I was seeing the communications carriers of that day. I was living with the griots of that time.
Mm. I have to step in just for a moment to break away, but this is absolutely fascinating. And what impresses me the most is your consciousness of the spirit of that time. And I'm sure that it was something that was extremely relevant to you. And we're going to unpack a bit more about that time. And we're also going to make our way to present day and the relationship of your poetry to your life experience, because I think it's all connected. You're listening to Open Door with Vince Robinson on 95.9 FM, Cleveland's urban alternative. We'll be back with poet Ketu right after this. Welcome back to Open Door with Vince Robinson and my conversation with Brother Ketu, who is a poet. He's 80 years old, and he shared with us that he was accused of a murder Back in 1965, I believe it was, he was 21 years old at the time. It was a murder that he did not commit, but he ended up in prison. His mother came to visit him, and she asked him whether or not he actually committed the murder. He said no. She said, "You'll be out in 5 years," and some other increments of months and days that I can't bring up to my mind right now, but I know it was extremely meaningful to you. And you were talking about you were seeing something on television back in 1966, and you talked about some of our heroes from back then. So I want you to pick it up from there, if you could.
Okay, and it was 1966,
Right?
not 1965. The Black Arts Movement was unfolding, and the Black Arts Movement is that aspect of our cultural identity that was coming to the fore, that was articulating that resistance that we are born into as a people who have been enslaved in some other people's language, culture, and identity. Those poets and the 500 to 600 books that I read in those 5 years gave me the mind to be free. Every book that I read, whether it was Popular Mechanics, the Tao Te Ching, the autobiography of Frederick Douglass and Malcolm X, whatever it was that I read, filled up a hole in my self-knowing. In that 5 years, I came to understand that my birth mother had made the way for me to be here. She had given me into the hands of an elder prophetess, and that I had been groomed for something that I couldn't identify. It began to come to me as I read the name Alafin Omowale Ketu Oladuwa came to me over a series of 18 months from November of 1966 onward. The name Alafin, ruler, spiritual leader of the city of Oyo. Omowale is the name that the Nigerian students gave to Malcolm during his tour there in 64. K2 is the city-state of the Yoruba people who are found in the area of Benin now. And then I'll go into that in a minute. And was the last city-state of the Yoruba people to fall to British colonization. Ola means to save, and Duwa is the suffix for the name Oduduwa, the founder of the Yoruba people. So it came to me that this was my lineage, and this was the name that those beyond the veil gave me. And so I took it to heart and have been that ever since. I'm walking in the tradition of a people who have been in resistance since the first Arab showed up on our shore. We go back to the European dispensation of our displacement, but we got to go back to the Arabs And then we got to go back beyond the Arabs to the Persians and the Romans and the Greeks. We have to understand that we are people who have been under assault for the last 5, 6, 7,000 years. We've been under assault. We're under assault now, not because of the Nazi in the White House. No, we're under assault because of the system that we live within, and because that system has taken root in us, and we think that's who we are. That ain't who we are. Death Row made it clear to me that that's not who I am. What I was accused of, I could not do. Now, I might slice somebody's throat, but it'll be in war. It'll be in defense of my people. It'll be in defense of my family. But to murder somebody? No, that's not something that I do. And so coming into the knowledge of self with the assistance of those pioneers of a tradition that goes back to the 20s and back to the African dispensation is what gives me life. And when I went to Guinea when I turned 60, all of that, it became what was in my head, what I was thinking and feeling became actualized. I understood the power of the African family. I lived with it. It took root and bloomed with me. I'm a poet because for me to be anything but a poet would mean for me to be at physical war with this place and these people. I'm a poet because I understand that the first tool of oppression is to take a people's language. I am speaking in a tongue that I can't truly articulate who I am. And so I must do that through the medium of poeting. That is bringing you the feeling of who I am. The truth of my identity is in what I feel. It's not in what I say. It's not the meaning of the words that you interpret. It's what you feel. Because first comes the feeling. This sound has an impress on your central nervous system before the thought can attach to the feeling. That thought attaching to the feeling becomes emotionality. That emotionality is what this society counts on us doing. It doesn't count on us attaching the sensation and the vibration to our identity, which then fuels the capacity of mind. The ancestors, the ancients, talked about mind as being the all. They didn't talk about God. They didn't put it in a person. They talked about mind as being the all. That's what I understand. But as poet, I understand that there's but one spirit in the universe. And each one of us, each sentient being, each creation is an aspect of that. My obligation as a human being is to fulfill what it is that comes through my mind and clear the channel so that it can come through with the clarity that needs to be there for whoever's there to receive it, to get it.
So I want to go back to a couple of things, and one of them is identity. Another one of them is education. You, at the point that you entered the penal system, your thought was, I'm innocent. I shouldn't have to go through all of this, but America gave you something different. And the reason that you had this confidence that you would receive justice is because of the indoctrination that you received through the education system and then all the other social things that happen. But you had 5 years to spend in a process of self-education, and you read all those books. And partly as a result of reading those books, your consciousness elevated and you connected with your identity. And eventually you got a confirmation of your identity through that work and the names that you received that you identify with. I just wanted to point out how critical it is for us to take the initiative to get that education that comes from sources other than our present education system, because you know, and I know it's no secret to anyone listening to this radio program right now, that Europeans and others, but those who are of European descent, are doing the best that they can to erase our presence from history and to erase our connection to our identity through the process. So I'm just thinking, if you were around during the 60s, I'm sure that you may have come into consciousness or awareness of the last poets. And I'm just wondering if your present day poetry is any way connected to or has a spiritual vibration of the last poets. We got about a minute.
And you talk about the revolution and how you're going to change the world, change yourself. And you talk about the revolution and all power to the people. Talk about yourself. While doing the same old jive things in time, the larcenous rhyme, ripping off nickels and dimes in time to your greed, your psychological subconscious need for things white, things not of or like you. And you talk about the revolution and how you want to bring it to the people, bring it to your people, bring it to yourself. That's the first poem that I wrote.
Wow.
That's the one that allowed me to center what I was getting here. And yes, the last poets, New York, hello. Yeah, the last poets.
You know, one of the last poets, David Nelson, has actually spent time here in Cleveland. And I was also privileged to perform with one of the others who did something downtown a few years back. We're going to talk more about poetry, and we're also going to talk about what brings you to Ohio when we return. This is Open Door with Vince Robinson on 95.9 FM WOVU, Cleveland's urban alternative. Back in a few. Welcome back to Open Door with Vince Robinson right here on 95.9 FM WOVU. If you haven't obtained it yet, you can get a brand new app, the iHeartRadio app, and you can hear this radio program on that app, as well as the other places that you find Open Door with Vince Robinson. You can go to WOVU.org. You can get the WOVU app, or you can, if you are in the right place in the city of Cleveland, you can turn on your FM radio and listen to 95.9 FM WOVU. I'm having a fascinating conversation with this brother named Ketu, and I'm going to write all his names down before this broadcast ends so I can say all of them. You know, I'm African too, so I got some of that ability to pronounce African names. And, you know, I find it interesting, you know, you connect to Yoruba, and they've got all these DNA tests now, you know, and they'll tell you, well, you're sub-Saharan African and all this other kind of stuff. What folks don't realize is that some of these names that we're using, they're a product of European indoctrination. You know, there was no country on the continent of Africa called Nigeria 400 years ago. You know, people related to the nations that they were connected to. So you were Yoruba, you were Igbo, you were Iwe, you were Ashanti, you were Akan, you were all these different nations, but you weren't those names that the Europeans gave to you. There's so much power in the name, so every time somebody says your name, they're speaking to the power that your name actually represents. So I think it's really a beautiful thing that you have those names. And I ain't even going to ask you what the other name was, because the other name doesn't have any bearing on who you are today and what you are doing today. You blessed us with a few lines from a poem that was your very first poem. And, after having heard that, I'm sure that there is a lot more that will come from you that will resonate with everyone. But I want to get to I'm going to call it an ascension, because you graduated from the University of European Indoctrination, and you stepped into a consciousness that was shaped by, things that happened. You witnessed the assassination of Malcolm X, and I'm sure you understood even in that time how important his spirit and his energy was and still are, So talk about your mission as a poet. You emerged from this penal institution with this developed consciousness that you had, and you weren't like others who went to a traditional university to get a college degree, to step into that Brook Brothers suit and the desk in the tower, downtown, whatever city it is. You took a different route, and you've been here for 80 years. So obviously you've been able to take care of yourself. So can you talk about your trajectory after you emerged from prison with this new identity and this new idea that my words mean something?
I came off death row August 17th, 1971. And by the end of the year, I had connected with a group of itinerant poets operating out of the New York area, organized by a multiracial couple who was living in the Bronx. We toured for about 18 months. We toured up and down the East Coast, colleges, universities, schools, community centers, and in gathering those relationships that were manifest in that period, I got hooked up with a brother named Calvin Hicks out of Boston. And Calvin was a social scientist and historian who was doing work for Goddard College in Plainfield, Vermont. And Calvin asked me to develop a prison education forum for the program that he was operating. And from that point on, I began to work with educational institutions and to use the power of experience and identity toward the purpose of self-liberation. In 1975, I got my bachelor's degree in theater and psychology at Fordham University. I got my master's in 1983 in journalism. During that period of time, I was working with young people. From 1973 on, I was working with young people in New York, as a counselor, and working with the Rockland Community Action Council as the director of one of their youth centers in Nyack, New York. Developing those connections in that and that life, understanding what it meant to be involved in the life of a community was another aspect of my growing into identity. Coming out of prison onto the road with the poets, I understood the power of the collective. Working with community, I understood that collective has to operate within the house of community. What death row and the study there had taught me, that's where I got my PhD. What that taught me was that family is the center of all human organization. What had been done to us was the decimation of the family, purposeful decimation of the family, and the removal of our language so that we could not identify who we were and so that something else could be implanted. I understood my work coming off the row as tuning, retuning, and giving people the consciousness, helping to formulate the feeling that what's missing is consciousness. I'm missing who I am. What does it mean to be who I am? Well, who am I? Well, I'm a human being. Are you really a human being, or are you an automaton that's been wound up and set afoot in a society that doesn't want you, and the only thing that makes you useful is your labor? What is it? What is our purpose for being here? That's the educational track that I took. From Newburgh, New York to Fort Wayne, Indiana, by way of J School at Northwestern and Medill. And I have to give props to Medill, because Medill gave me the opportunity to do what I do in a form that could get me paid. Understanding that at this point I had a wife and 2 children that needed to be safe in the world and comfortable enough in the world so that they could identify who they were. I had to have a job. So I turned to journalism and got a job after my master's in Fort Wayne, Indiana, working for the Knight Ridder Company. Stayed there for a year and went to the black newspaper in town, Frost Illustrated. Stayed there for 10 years, a total of 15 years in 2 spans. And became an advocate for community voice through journalism. The newspaper that I came into was a social sheet. It talked about cotillions and things that were happening at church and Negro first, all that. I brought the professional training that I had received at Medill to the community in Fort Wayne and was able to fashion into being a product that spoke for the community. That that training under the tutelage of a wise elder, Sister Edna, hmm, look at here. The mind does funny things. The tutelage that I got there was how to be a community voice without being a quote unquote leader. I had no interest in leadership because I understood that the collective is what needs to lead. From Frost, I went to found the Three Rivers Djembe Ensemble, which was a group of 7 to 17-year-old young people who played the music and the tradition of the Malinke people in West Africa. We played the dununs and the djembes and the bells and set a vibe in the community that said there's an African presence here. And this presence has the power through the aegis of these children to move a community. So that's the work that I've done, in short, until this point.
Okay.
Until I turned 70.
Okay. So, and I thought I heard you say you went to West Africa. You said Guinea at the age of 60, and I was curious about whether or not that was your first visit to Africa. So I want to ask you that on the other side of this break, and I also want to talk about your connection to the music, because the music is an integral part of identity and culture. And from my perspective, Yoruba land, Benin, that's a very spiritual place, because those folks are in tune with the other side and the unseen ways, and folks that in ways that those of us who live on this side of the globe have no idea about. So
none.
Yeah. So let's talk about that when we get back. I'm having a great conversation with Brother Ketu, and I'm going to have him say his whole name and spell it out for me so I can give it to you on the other side of this break as well. You're listening to Open Door with Vince Robinson on Cleveland's Urban Alternative, 95.9 FM, WOVU. Welcome back to Open Door with Vince Robinson and my conversation with Olafin Omowale Ketu Oladuwa. How'd I do, brother?
You did well, bro.
Okay. Brother Ketu is an 80-year-old poet who has an amazing life experience, and he has described basically being a griot. You know, you got the formal training and you got the informal training. So you went to the so-called real university, J School, and someone named Edna played a pivotal role in raising your consciousness about the official stuff. But then you also had that last poet inspired existence as a poet, and you've given us a few words, and maybe before this segment ends, maybe you can give us another poem if you don't mind. But we were talking about your connection with the music, and I was just curious about you being steeped in African tradition, but it wasn't until you were 60 that you got to Africa, or did it happen before then?
No, it was 60. For my 60th birthday, I went to Guinea, West Africa, and Conakry, Guinea-Conakry, and studied with Master Famadou Konate for 2 months. And Famadou is a legend, an incredible impression on my life. But Famadou gave me the confidence and the understanding of the culture living there in his compound to bring back to the young people that myself and my comrades in Fort Wayne had organized as the Three Rivers Djembe Ensemble. And our purpose from that founding was not for us to lead the ensemble, but to teach them, those young people, how to lead themselves. And 6 months after I was back, we gave them their head, and they took it and ran with it, bro. So we here don't have any understanding what Africa really is. We do not. I saw stuff in Africa that I just don't tell people about because
they'd never believe it.
They'd never believe it. They would never believe it. And Africa, that experience in Africa, and then that was 2006-7. No, 2003. That was 2003. Then in 2006-7, we took 10 young people and 4 adults to the continent to study. And that was a 5-week period for them. And we had been teaching them and telling them about the power of their own families and that they needed to be clearly, substantially rooted in those families and not running away from them. They got the opportunity to see that and to work with those families in West Africa, and it changed all of them.
Yes.
It changed all those young people.
Let me ask you this. You had this cultural identity and awareness for all those years, and it started, I suppose, when you were in your 20s, but it took you almost 40 years to get there. What was it like for you to actually have the experience at being in the place that you perhaps had romanticized for so long?
It was a slap in the head. It was a slap upside the head and said, get rid of the romanticism and now come into the practical reality of being an African in the world. That's what it was.
Yeah. Kind of like the slap in the face that you got when you were sitting in that cell and you thought that it shouldn't be this way, but it is.
That's right. Okay. So that, from that point on, being African is not just a label. It's an identity. It's a truth walking. It's breath. It's everything. We are an African people. When I say we are an African people, I'm talking about I live constantly with my ancestors. My ancestors are here in the room with me talking to you. There's no pretense that comes from intellectualization. The universe is not an intellectual thinking. It's not a thinking. It's a doing. The universe does. The universe acts. The universe is always in movement, and so are we. And we are always developing. From the time I was 7 years old to the time I'm 80, I have been in constant development, most of which I did not plan. If I'd have planned it, it would have gone south real quick. That's what the first 21 years of my life was teaching me. When you plan stuff and you think you're in control, just watch it and watch how it goes south.
Something interesting that I'm thinking about in this moment, the fact that you took that tour of 48 different states, and I think you said that it was something that the ancestors motivated you to do.
Yes.
We're living in a time of controversy because there's a disconnect on the part of some of us about our connection to Africa. So there's this whole movement now that, no, we're indigenous Americans, this is our land. And, and I get it. There are some very well-known folks who can trace their heritage back to people who have always been here in America. And I get that as well. But at one point in the evolution of this planet, Africans were everywhere, all over the planet. And the evidence of their presence, that's the work of Dr. Runoko Rashidi and others who they established the global presence of Africans. So it's just ironic to me that you would receive those instructions from your ancestors to see this country, which honestly is just as much our country as it is anyone's. As a matter of fact, this is our country. And I think that's part of the reason that they don't want us to know, because then they become aware of the fact that they owe us for what they've done to this country, and that there is a debt owed for our use in the history of this country. This country became the most successful country on the planet because of us. But not just because of us, but because of what the Europeans who founded this country called the United States of America got from Africans. The technology, and not just back then, but even now. I mean, and we talk about this all the time, but what would America be without the internet, cell phones, refrigerators, all of the technological advancements that occurred in this country in the history seem to be connected to us in some form or fashion. I mean, you take that street, that traffic light for granted. The very first traffic signal on the planet was at East 105th Street and Euclid Avenue right here in Cleveland, Ohio. So, but I'm just getting to the point that, we are a global people, and we are people of African descent, whether it was, recently as a result of what happened 400 or so years ago when people were transported to this side of the globe on ships, or whether you can tie your lineage to someone who has always been here on this side of the world. We're all Africans. And the real quandary with this is that it's difficult to impress upon some of our brothers and sisters their connection to Africa. They want to say they don't have anything to do with it, but you go to church and they clapping on 2 and 4, or they getting filled with the Spirit, just like Africans do. And the other irony is that the Africans, the continental Africans, are just as affected by a system of racism, and I call it pseudo white supremacy, because I don't think white supremacy exists in any form or fashion, just the mind game that has been played with us. But, it's just so sad that we as a people in this country are so disconnected from our heritage and our connection. And I think part of the role of us as griots and as poets and as journalists is to communicate a certain sense of identity and culture to our brothers and sisters. What would you say as we conclude?
I would say that you said it very well. That's what I'd say, that you said it very well. And that it's really important for us to understand that we are not in control, that this is an unfolding that is happening, that we need to be resonant and consonant with. We need to understand that we are not in control. There's something else happening. There's no way for us to understand the all that is unfolding. That's why being clear about what's happening in your neighborhood, in your community, who are the people in your neighborhood and in your community who you can come together with and work out the differences that we have, so that around that table, collective mind emerges. It's not the individual. That's what we've been given. They gave us that so that we could be separate and apart from one another. It's about the collective. Everything that I'm doing here in Cleveland this week is talking about what is the collective? How are you tied to the collective? Even though you don't think you are, you are. And it's simply a matter of manifesting the energy that's coming through us. And stop thinking about what's out here, because there's nothing out here. This is an illusion. It's unfolding within us. And what are those dates we have?
Well, by the time that this program airs, those dates will have passed. But I think
Okay.
I can summarize your message to the folks who are listening to us right now is
Okay.
to know your purpose and
Know
to
your
do
purpose.
what you can where you are with what you have. It really comes down to that.
Yes.
Know who you are, know your purpose, and do what you can to pitch in for the common good.
And understand that family is at the center.
Absolutely.
Family is the central point of culture and identity.
Yes. And it's George Fraser who would remind us that the lowest marriage rate in America is in black families or black unfamilies because the mother and father are present. And in order for us to move forward, we need to do something about that. Brothers, be responsible. Sisters, be responsible. Yes.
We need to stop defining family in the terms of the people who have oppressed us.
There you go.
I come out of extended family.
Yes.
As a foster child, I come out of extended family.
Yes.
And I've been extending family all my life.
Okay. That's the last word, brother. Olafin Omowale Ketu Oladuwa, the poet, the journalist, the griot. Thank you for joining me on Open Door with Vince Robinson. And to those of you who are listening, as always, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, make today your absolute best day. Peace.